Well, hello. Hey, guys and gals, I'm Andy Asher. I'm editor over here at bloomerboomer.com. This is the last day of September, and it brings in a new month of amazing programs, starting a new season. And that includes the co-founder of a Silver Oak Winery. Now, that is one of Napa's legendary wineries. Also, we have Darla Noble. Now, she's a grandmother in rural Missouri, and with her lessons, that she learned about grandparenting. And I know that she brings a very unique perspective that I think is pretty exciting. Also, continuing into the second season is Dr. Gregory Hammer, the author of Gain Without Pain, the tool chest you cannot live without, to conquer the walls of internal and external struggle. And in a moment, we will talk with Dr. Gregory Hammer. Now, if you want to be part of this amazing journey with the Bloomer Boomer community, please register on the website for the newsletter and qualify for member benefits. And we live stream everywhere, including Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, even Twitch, Instagram, and on bloomerboomer.com. In the meantime, we'll get to hear from Dr. Greg Hammer and Gain Without Pain in a moment. But first, remember to join the Bloomer Boomer community. Well, hello, Greg. Hello, Greg. Acceptance. Welcome. It's good to see you today.
Great to see you too, Andy, as always.
Well, listen, acceptance is the topic. That has so many different meanings. The simple word acceptance, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how it applies to what we're talking about today.
Sure. Well, we're kind of working our way through the gain elements. We talked about gratitude, and acceptance is the A in gain, intention being the I, and non-judgment being the N. And we have also talked about the negativity bias that we have and how we tend to remember all the negative things that happen to us, our experiences, our feelings, our thoughts, and we tend to forget about the positive things that happen. And we also tend to be fixated on the past and the future in ways that are all too often maladaptive. That is, when we contemplate the past, we often get stuck in our shame and regret, embarrassment. And in the future, we often go to fear and anxiety. And so these gain principles are important in terms of helping us be present whenever possible, and therefore be more resilient and happy, and not really circling our drain, if you will, with negativity and with maladaptive thoughts of the past and the future. But we can't just do what's called a spiritual bypass by some people, which means we can't take something that's unpleasant and just focus on our gratitude and our intention and non-judgment, and not deal with the feelings that pain and suffering represent. So unless we actually go to those uncomfortable feelings, we will simply suppress them and they will come back to bite us. And so the idea is that when we're accepting pain and suffering, that we actually very deliberately sit and open our hearts and bring those discomfort feelings, those pain and suffering feelings, closer and closer until we really are merged with them and there's no separation. So I give you a more specific example of what I mean. Many of us have lost loved ones in our lives, and their memory may be cherished, but also their passing elicits very uncomfortable and painful feelings. And often, again, we go to negativity bias. I should have done this, I should have done that. We're judging ourselves. And we sort of get stuck in maladaptive thoughts of the past. And so when we're doing our gain contemplation, we sit and we get in touch with our breath, and we'll go into the meditation more in a future session. But we experience our gratitude first, and then we transition to really confronting those things that are uncomfortable for us. And, for example, for me, the first element in my acceptance contemplative meditation has to do with my son's passing 3 years ago. And so it's easy for me to transition from gratitude to a sense of loss and just the deep-seated ache in my chest that is elicited when I think about my beautiful boy's passing. But what I do is I make the determination that there's nothing I could do about it. There's certainly nothing I can do about it. And therefore, I'm discerning between what I can change and what I cannot change. I cannot change his death and the feelings that it elicits. So therefore, my only real option is to accept them. And so as I'm doing my breathing and transitioning from gratitude to acceptance, I actually envision my chest opening, my heart opening, and these uncomfortable feelings coming closer and closer and closer until they really are inside my heart, till I've really sunken into those feelings, and there's no separation between what might be called myself and these feelings of discomfort. And when we bring these feelings in, and when we really truly merge with them, we ask ourselves the question, can I live with this feeling forever? The answer becomes yes. And if it's not, then we need to go back and further our contemplation.
And I was about to, ask you, and you really explained the reason, the answer to my question, because I was going to ask you, why is it so difficult for us to accept acceptance? But it is difficult, isn't it? I mean, you jumped through a lot of hoops to reach to that point that you're at right now.
Yes, I mean, it's painful, and we tend to shy away from that which is painful. But what we can discover when we bring these painful feelings closer and closer is that once we've merged with them, there's really not as much there as we thought. Prior, when we were resisting the experience of this pain, we were magnifying our suffering. And there's a formula in my book, as you may recall, which is that suffering equals pain times resistance. So we have a painful experience. It is what it is. We cannot change it. We've determined that through our most discerning efforts that we can't change this. So if we try not to think about it, if we suppress it, we're really resisting it rather than accepting it, if those two can be considered opposites, that is acceptance and resistance. So we have the pain, we resist it, and the product of the pain and resistance is increase in suffering. So if we acknowledge that we have this painful experience, but we open our heart and our minds to it, and we fully accept it, through that acceptance and decreased resistance, our suffering is diminished.
So at some point or another, we come to the conclusion that it is what it is, and that is, in a way, the beginning of acceptance.
Absolutely. So when we think about acceptance, it's not having a laissez-faire attitude. It's quite the opposite. It's actually a contemplation exercise in which we consider that painful experience or those painful thoughts, and we ask ourselves the question, is this something I can change, or is this something that I cannot change? If it's something that we can change and it's worthy of our energy input to change it, then we should commit ourselves to that course. But if it's something that we cannot change, an event that has occurred in the past, for example, that cannot be modified, then our only option is really to sit with that, put it front and center, and imagine opening our hearts to it and inviting it in.
Yeah.
And this is not our natural instinct, but it's a way of actually really lessening our suffering.
Yeah. And so really, in many ways, acceptance is about accepting ourselves for, how we feel about things. It's kind of an internal thing.
it is an internal thing. And again, these gain principles are all interrelated. So accepting something uncomfortable about ourselves is really intimately connected to non-judgment. That is letting go of self-judgment. And you know, we talked about this and we'll talk about it further in the future, but we tend to, through our negativity bias, judge ourselves most harshly. And when we do that, we're not accepting our own flaws, if you want to think of it that way. They're not really flaws, they're just the human elements that are what makes us who we are. And if we resist these, and especially those things that we really can't change, we just magnify the suffering that we experience. So it's all about letting go of judgment, letting go of self-judgment, and that is a form of acceptance in and of itself.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it because a lot of times, you know, we look at acceptance as some kind of an external sort of conclusion about things, but really it's very internal.
Yes, I mean, it may be that we're contemplating something that seems external to ourselves, but is there really such a thing? You know, is there
No,
really
right.
truly a separation between myself and that which is not myself? You know, everything I experience is really in defiance of any separation.
So let me jump into the other facet of that is how the acceptance or you know lack of it relate to suffering.
Sure. Well, you know, I think others have framed it in a variety of ways, but I've heard the expression that which we resist persists. That's one way of looking at it. But in fact, when we suppress feelings that we have that are uncomfortable, we all can relate to the fact that they don't go away. They always tend to bubble up or resurface at the worst possible time, and they lead to an inner conflict that is really representative of suffering. And so there are lots of examples of that. If I try not to think about my dear son Max, it just seems as though those feelings enlarge. Whereas if I look at it straight on and open myself to those feelings, I can really merge with them and in so doing determine that they're really not so bad. I mean, frankly, we're all going to die someday, and we can either try hard not to think about it, or we can put it front and center and accept it. And I'll tell you that when I decided to go into pediatric intensive care medicine, I knew quite well that I was going to be confronted commonly with death and dying. And I made the determination that if I tried to resist the discomfort that comes with my patients and their families dealing with death and dying, I would never be able to get close to my patients and their families, because I would always be pushing them away with in the same process as pushing these uncomfortable feelings away. And so I just decided this is something I need to take head on. And I think we all might be better served dealing with our mortality in that direct, open-hearted fashion, rather than trying hard not to think about it and then being reminded quite frequently, if not on a daily basis, of our mortality and how uncomfortable that makes us feel.
Now, really, how you wrote the book originally with other healthcare providers in mind, because that is so much a reality to their lives, but how you are also finding ways to apply this to everyone. And
Absolutely. I mean, we all have the same sorts of feelings, regardless of our profession. You know, we're all fearful of losing this thing we call a separate self. We're picturing that, you know, we're born, we live our lives, and we die, and we're all frightened by that. We should all, in fact, embrace that this is something that is part of human nature, and we all share it. We're not alone. And I think this is something that, would serve most of us well if we can come to grips with this, because it's really at the root of so much suffering in our lives, and we can mitigate that by really accepting it.
And you're in a way saying a lot of what Bloomer Boomer represents, because we represent the element that there are not any people who are role models in many cases as you get older, because the role models don't exist anymore. And so we have to learn from others, maybe, although they're hard to find at times, to learn from a role model that we discover. And that is really a lot of what we're about, because you represent your message represents a form of role modeling that people can learn by, that they might not have known otherwise, because you have unique experiences that you're able to share with others who can understand maybe better different parts of life as getting older.
Well, I hope so. I think the message is in part just that we really need to let go of our resistance, accept the reality of who we are. And your audience and you and I, Andy, are of a similar age cohort, and we're getting older, and it can be a very frightening reality. And so the question is, how do we want to deal with that? And we can look toward role models as people like, for example, Wayne Thiebaud, who's a wonderful California artist who is, I think he may have just turned 100. And last time I saw him and had a conversation with him, he was 97 or 98, and he was still playing tennis. He's still painting, and he's just very centered. And he's really an amazing guy and a role model of mine.
Wow, you know Wayne Thiebaud. You're my hero. That guy, the work he does is just extraordinary.
Yeah,
there's nothing like it.
I think what we learn, Andy, is that really this is we need to be our own role model, if you will, and really through accepting ourselves, we we appreciate, especially at our age when we've had a lot of world experience, that we're all human. We have much more in common than we do our differences, and so we can be our own role model, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're running on here. Can you take a moment to answer a few questions right after we take a quick break here?
I'd be delighted to, Andy.
All right. Alrighty, we are back. Betty asks about acceptance. She disagrees with her daughter on how she teaches the grandchildren about acceptance. It's probably a difficult concept for young people, but maybe any thoughts on how she should handle that?
Well, I don't know if the issue is dealing with the disagreement with her daughter or trying to come up with advice for her daughter on how to teach her children.
I'm not sure either.
We all would like it if the world conformed to our views and sort of laid itself out in front of us in a way that was optimal for us. But in fact, we need to accept the fact that that is not the case, that the world doesn't comport with our ideals, and therefore we have to rethink it and accept in general those things. So for example, I think a lot of parents have some disagreements with their children, and it cuts both ways. I'm sure a lot of individuals don't agree with their parents about everything. And so I think all we can do is represent and radiate what we think is best and what's right with our children and our grandchildren, and lead by example, and simply accept the fact that we're not always going to agree. We don't need to convince everybody of our point of view. I think with respect to dealing with grandchildren, simply modeling what we think is the best behavior and answering their questions openly and honestly in the best way we can is probably the ideal. And, we're not going to change everybody's mind, and we're not going to teach our kids and our grandchildren to think exactly as we do. And that's just something that we need to accept. In fact, it makes life interesting.
Yeah, well, that's definitely, I think, in the long term, kind of the way it makes it easier to look at things like that. And of course, acceptance, it's kind of the word can cross over into a lot of different areas. And let's see, this one I'm not real clear on it, but let me try to read it to you. Nancy is in an affair that her son-in-law does not accept that she's in, and as a grandparent, she just has difficulty accepting it. That's a little vague. Does that make any sense to you?
I'm not sure who's having the affair. Is it Nancy or is it her son-in-law?
It's a son-in-law.
I see. Well, again, Nancy would be well served by asking herself whether she can have any influence on this or not. And if she can't, then she has to decide to accept it. And of course, I mean, that awareness, I'm not sure if her daughter is married to this individual, but of course that would be very upsetting and difficult to accept. But not knowing any of the details, I mean, there are things about others' behavior that we cannot really influence. And so we have to decide, do we want a relationship with this person or not? And if we do want a relationship with that person, then we'll have to focus on the good and accept those things that we don't care for. But, that certainly sounds hypothetically like a very difficult situation. But,
so I guess acceptance also involves some compromise.
It does. I mean, I've got a good friend who is liberally minded, and everyone else in her family is Republican and very conservative in their thoughts. And when she gets together with her family for holidays or visits, she really dreads it. But I've said, really, I think what we need to focus on is just accepting the others in our lives, particularly our family members, for who they are. And they may have different views than we do, but I think that if it's important to be connected to our family members, we should just try to focus on the positive elements and have an unconditional relationship with them to the extent feasible, accepting their political views as being very different from our own.
Yeah, well, this is a good topic. Hopefully, I know we'll address it again, and wanted to just take a break here, and you can talk a little bit about contacting you and your book and next week. Okay, one moment. You can be right back. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, Greg, we're back. I don't know if you have had a chance to check on the schedule, but what we're going to be doing next week, or next week.
Next week we'll talk about intention.
Okay.
And how essential being purposeful and intentional in our thoughts and our actions is. John Kabat-Zinn, who's really the founder of mindfulness, define mindfulness as being present on purpose, non-judgmentally. And so I think the on purpose part is what we'll dive into next week.
Sounds good. And let's see here. I've got your website here. You talk about and anything else there? Fantastic. Well, good. Well, as always, it's great to see you. You have a good remainder of the week, and stay safe.
Likewise, Andy. Pleasure being with you. Look forward to seeing you again.
Okay, Greg. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you for watching. Greg will be back here the same day and same time next week. But we do have a schedule that's going to be showing on the website very soon, so you can get all the schedule of different shows. But again, that's Dr. Greg Hammer of Gain Without Pain. And you can find out more on Facebook, YouTube, and at bloomerboomer.com. And if you like this, please like us over at Facebook and follow us and all that, and also at YouTube as well. And in the meantime, we'll see you next time.